Okay, we'll get started this morning. If I can get some projection. Oh, guess I need to put my card in. Try that again. Well, while that is hopefully powering up, I sent out actually a couple of notifications to you over the weekend, including one that pointed out a change in schedule. Please note the revised syllabus, particularly those who have not yet made a presentation in the tutorial. In the last 3 weeks, we're going to jumble everything up a little bit. So if you haven't done your presentation yet, take a look that you have a different date now. You're in a different week. It is on the, I sent a copy out to everybody, plus it is, as usual, on Moodle. So let me let's just go there while we're kind of waiting for people to show up here anyway, and make it kind of official. I hope. I was having some trouble with Moodle over the weekend, which again delayed a lot of my work. Frustrating. And it's not coming up now either. So the other pages seem to be working. The Moodle does not seem to be working this morning. Okay, well, we'll come back to that later. So what I wanted to do today was go through some final exams for a course for the same course that I taught in Kazakhstan. Just give you an I went ahead and put grades on them, so you could see the difference between the different grades I might give. Sorry that I haven't gotten everybody's first broadsheet project done yet. I wanted to give you quite a bit of individual feedback, but with 96 students, I'm just going to have to probably today and tomorrow, I may not be able to give you a lot of feedback. I'll be able to tell you what percentage you got in each of the area, you know, the design, the graphics, the headlines, the editing, the text. So I'll be able to give you that much feedback, but when I started typing out, you know, maybe 2 or 3 sentences behind each one, and by the time I download and review and grade and make comments, it's just taking more time than I have. So anyway, I will get you grades early in the week. How much comments I have, not sure. Maybe I'll grade and then go back and comment as I have time. I'm not sure how to handle that. I've never taught a class, a hands-on class like this with 96 students. I think the most I've ever had is like not more than 30. They were at QMEP, they were limited to, well, how many computers we had in the computer lab, which was 25. So once in a while, because there were absentees and stuff, I might let 26 or 27 come to the class, but 96, never heard of that before. So even with tutorials, it's just way too much. So anyway, let's take a look at, this is a C paper. It says right at the top, C paper. So what's wrong with it? First off, using the wrong style at the top. That should be a sans serif type, and this is a serif type. It has no verb in the headline, and if there's no verb, then there should be a sub-headline with a verb. They do have a summary sentence, but that does not necessarily, that goes outside the rule. Again, if you don't have a verb in the headline, you should have a verb in a sub-headline. Also, the summary sentence should be bold. It should have a period at the end, so it's not written properly as a summary sentence, but there is one. And this one basically did what I've seen a couple of you guys do, and that is she just took the lead and made the lead the summary sentence. So it's not really a summary sentence, it's the lead. And that's not acceptable. And so paragraph 2 is starting off with, I mean, the lead is actually paragraph 2 of the story. Way too much space between the paragraphs, which I see a lot of you doing, and no indents. Most of you have gotten into the indents, but some of you are making them wrong. Some of you are making them with the space bar. Don't do that. Go to the actual first line indent and do it there so that it's consistent. And that's really where just one click of the button, almost none of you use style sheets. And with just basically one click and type in with your first story, you set up your body text. I mean, basically your first story, you can set up a headline style. That would be a character style. You set up your body text, which is a paragraph style, because it has the indent and everything built into it. And so after that, probably the very first thing you do once you have even just those two styles set up is you first off click into your story, into a new story you put in, and you hit Control A for select all. And because if you do that, if you hit select all, it selects everything. Even if you can't see it, it selects it. So even if your text box isn't big enough to contain your entire story, select all or Control A on the keyboard selects everything in that story, even that which you cannot see. And then you hit the body text. Even if it has some stuff that is not body text, you can undo the body text later, like with a byline, stuff like that. You should not have an indent with a byline. Obviously, you don't have an indent with a headline, but typically your headline's in a different box. But anyway, so pretty much the easiest way is once you set up your body text, as a paragraph style, is whenever you bring in a new story, you click into it, you hit Control A, you hit body text. You might have to, if you're bringing in from Word, you might first off, there's one already established button that says no style. You might want to hit, after you hit Control A, hit no style, then hit body text, hopefully to get rid of any lingering hidden style commands that came in with Word. Word can override your Quark commands if you're not. So that's also a good place to just get rid of them, is to after you hit select all, after you hit Control A, is hit no style, then hit body text. So that only takes like a second to do, and it saves you time immediately with every other story you put in. And so if you made no other styles than just body text, you should make the body text style as soon as you start putting together your page. And it only makes sense. Again, it would be a character style. So there's two styles. One is paragraph, one is character. And so it would also make sense with every headline you make, go ahead and make a style out of that. And that way, once you get a couple of styles set up, then that becomes a little bit easier too. Once even though you've already made it a body style, a body text style, select the byline and then take off the indent off of that and then name that one byline style. So you also have your byline style that will be consistent. You can also set up your drop cap style if you're going to use drop caps. And that one you simply do, you go into your first paragraph, then you select the first paragraph and you take off the indent for that also. So you could do that in the byline at the same time. You take off the indents on both the byline and the first paragraph. Then you make your byline style and make that, basically it's the same size as your body text. All you're doing is making it centered and bold italics. So that's easy to do. Save that as your byline style. Select your first paragraph. Again, after taking off its indent, you go ahead and put on the drop cap and save that. That would then be a paragraph style because that's involving the entire paragraph. So byline is a paragraph style because it's again centered. Once you center or flush right or something, that's a paragraph style because it's more than just the text itself. So anything that involves anything more than the text itself is a paragraph style. Anything that's just the text itself is a text style, or a character style. So anyway, we may review that a little bit later. I'm going to have to put down this microphone. I can't hold it and do my work here at the same time. Okay, so again, going down why this is a C paper. No vertical justification. We can draw a line through here and we see maybe this one's lined up with this one. It's hard to tell, probably not. In fact, I can tell by comparing different levels that this is not lined up with the first column. But this one certainly isn't. By, quite a few lines is not lined up. We have a headline here, all caps. I said maybe a 1 on a page you could do, so I might overlook that. But it's not. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I'm counting the spaces as characters. 13 characters off of matching up, of filling the line. Not acceptable. That's going to get downgraded. Again, second story, odd. Here's a byline at the bottom. There's again, this looks like this is supposed to be a summary paragraph, but in reality, it's this first. It is the lead, and this is its supposed lead is really the second paragraph. So it's not correct. The byline is too big. It's not Times New Roman. It's the wrong position. It's lots of problems. Well, I guess I was wrong. This is the second paragraph down here. This can't be the lead. It starts off with consequently. So consequently never leads a lead. So this is, if this is the second paragraph, I presume it is. Anyway, it's based. So this does, like I say, this is the lead. By the way, that used to be that used to be a style. I've never seen it in the last 10 years. But before they started using summary paragraphs, there were some newspapers enlarging their lead. So it was kind of like a summary sentence in that the lead was 1 or 2 points bigger than the rest of the story. I did that for a while. In fact, I did it for quite a while. I thought that that was before summary sentences came into vogue. And I thought that was, enlarging the lead was a way of drawing attention to the lead. We didn't make it bold, but it was bigger. That was kind of the predecessor to the summary sentence, was just making the lead bigger and making it more attract more attention that way. And I didn't think that was a bad alternative. Going on down, again, no indents, extra space between paragraphs, not acceptable in the real world. The story next to it, one or the other should be boxed, and neither one is. The headline is too tight to the text or to the graphic above it. Literally touching it. You can't have it touching your text. There's just some sloppy work here. There's a quote mark, or a double quote mark at the end. There's no quote mark at the beginning. So that doesn't make any sense. Again, the same situation with the lead becoming the summary sentence. None of the graphics so far have a byline, or a caption. And so that was it. I was just, not sure if I required 3 or 4 stories on this one. We'll see as we look at some other examples to jog my memory. Anyway, going all the way to the bottom of the page, all the columns should be lined up. They're not, so we don't have vertical justification. I think in this assignment I did not require horizontal justification. You see these are all ragged right, so that's okay. I didn't require, in fact, I think I maybe even told them that year we were going to use ragged right. A couple of things I like about ragged right, that is a line left, ragged right, without lining up, without justifying. 2 things I like about it and why I prefer to use it. First off, research has shown that people read ragged right better. There's no false spaces between words and stuff. And so academically, I can look at it and say, well, if the research says they read it better, then let's do it. I don't like the look of extra spaces between words in order to fill out that, line up the last line or the last word in each paragraph. You have to put false spaces between words, and which is why it's not read very well. It looks to me ugly. It also immediately gives you more white space between paragraphs. So without actually increasing the actual gutter between each of the columns, you end up with more white space between each of the columns because you have ragged right, and very few lines come out to exactly the width of the column. So you automatically get some extra space there. So for all those reasons, most of my newspapers that I've published, I've made ragged right, which is contrary to the norm. That's why I'm having you do justification in our class. I am complying with the norm, even though I disagree with it. I'm complying with the norm. There are some things you will see that I comply with, some things I feel strongly enough about that I go against the norm. I feel there's better practice out there. So I try to alert you to that so that you understand. So anyway, that's this first one that got a C. It was just, this was at a final exam, so by now they should have a better idea of what they're doing. And so when somebody gets this lazy and after a whole semester of being taught and taught and taught, I think a C is generous at that point. Okay, going to another one. Here's another C paper. Again, the person is using Times New Roman, or at least a serif type for headlines, and the style was the norm is sans serif. And this one is just the opposite, as far as the other one had way too much space between the headline and the story. This one has not enough space. They have the P's, the descenders are touching the here in this photo. The photo is not well cropped, so the photo should be better cropped. But but they're touching, and so there's double excuse not to pay attention that you're touching that the descenders are touching the photo. This photo here is far too small for that many heads in it. I've tried to explain that if it were actually going to press, the newsprint that is used with newspapers, the ink spreads, the detail is lost. But even in here on the computer, you really can't see enough detail to make it a very good picture. You still want to see the face, and the face here is just very, you can hardly see the faces. And so these, by the way, are dancers, Spanish dancers, among the students who were performing at some event. So we don't want to do that. Now, the other thing is this is treated like a sidebar. I've mentioned to you, in fact, I showed you, and let me maybe try to find it again real quick, an example of a sidebar. Because in some of your stories, you should be using a sidebar. That would be the stories where you have more than one story. A sidebar is a second story on the same subject. And this is how it would be packaged if this were a sidebar. It's not. But if it were a sidebar, then this would be one way of doing it. You would have a headline over both stories, and you would have a subheadline under above each story. So the main headline would be over both of them. She also put a period at the end of the headline. We don't do that. And by the end of the semester, you should know that. This is a rather bad subheadline. It's extremely rare. I'm not sure I've ever seen from a professional an all caps subheadline. I have seen, in fact, I think the book refers to it, sometimes when you have an overline, it might be in all caps. That sometimes has been on all caps. But underneath in a subheadline, I don't think I've ever seen it from a professional. Here again, this person, okay, well, this one is not taking out the lead as the summary sentence, but it's just a bad summary sentence. You can't start a summary sentence with only the person's last name. You have Bergeson and the word said are together, rather floppy. Anyway, so you need to identify people in a summary sentence the same as you would a lead. You can't just start off with somebody's last name because you haven't introduced that person yet. So you can't do that. So let me go back though and take a look real fast if I can see if I can find the example I sent you. You should have looked at it, but you may not have. If I can find it real quick. If I can't, I won't. Well, I do not see it there. I did send it to you, though. It is in an announcement. If you look in Moodle, you'll see an example of a story with a sidebar. I'm not seeing it here, and I would have thought it would have been in this one. Let's I'm sure it wasn't as soon as 8. Again, 9, it doesn't look like it's in 9. Well, let me see if by chance the Moodle has opened up yet. Anyway, go back. If you don't know what I'm talking about with a sidebar, go. I gave you an example with the, actually I guess that is where I could find it. I remember it's with the Louisville paper. So if I find, looks like it is coming up. No, it isn't going to come up. Okay, this also I have put up on Moodle already, the sample of 30 newspapers. And so it was in the Louisville Courier, as I recall, where I sent you the top of that story to show you what a story with a sidebar looked like. This is a good example for other things too. Headline over a photo. We've already looked at, I did that with my tabloid. Again, you need some blue sky or something that will allow you to put that photo in there. So apparently they got some bad news in Louisville about this bridge, that it needed some work or whatever. And I guess it's called the Xiamen Bridge, as I'm reading it, on I-65. That's Interstate Highway 65 is what that stands for. And so you have your main photo at the top and a main headline across the top. And then you have 2 stories down below. The 2 stories are also divided by a photo, so it also divides that way above and below. Not all sidebars have to be treated exactly this way. Some can be, you could put a box around one, even a shadow box around one of the stories, and tint the cover, tint the box so that it looks like a piece of art. And so if you don't have an art to separate them, you can separate it by making one of the stories a piece of art, basically. Putting it into a box, shading in a color the box that it's in. But this is a very common way of doing it, and probably the best way is just to go ahead and have something over the whole package. So when I say package, this is what I'm talking about. If you now this one, each story you could say is modular, kind of, except what does the headline and the photo go with? So when you think of modularity with a package like this, it's the whole package. One story may not be modular, but the package as a whole is modular. So that's one thing that most of you did wrong, who had stories that were related to each other. Now, in one case, there were actually, I think, 3 stories related to each other. 3 stories should not be going in for a subject that you would have in this class. One of them might be a sidebar. Make sure it's not too redundant to the other one. The other 2, either just don't use one or combine them into one story and put a double byline on it. That's your choice. But if you have 3 stories on one subject that I've given you, it's because I wanted you to do that, and I explained it. I tried to explain it the day that we set up the teams, and I was hoping that somebody in the teams would understand me to explain it to everybody else on the team. But a lot of people then put in 3 stories, and they were just wherever they put them. They didn't combine 2. They didn't package them. You need to do that. So this is how you would do that. Is first off, there's nothing you have that merits 3 stories. So if you have 3 stories, you should either drop one or combine it with another one and find the one that's most different. Cut out anything that's too redundant to the first story and use it as a sidebar, more or less like this one. So again, you can have a headline over both of them, a subhead over each of them separately, and then the whole package becomes modular. Okay, so that's how you treat a sidebar. So this is set up like a sidebar, but this isn't a sidebar. So that's another problem, is that this story to the right has nothing to do with the Dream Act. So it shouldn't be set up like a sidebar. And if it were, headlines, a subheadline is not all caps. A subheadline, you don't let words hyphenate. Some of you allowed some of your words in your headlines to hyphenate. No, 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 don't do it. Subheadlines are the same as headlines in that you fill out all the lines to within 3 characters. I'm giving you a little bit of break to 4 characters. Professional standard is 3 characters. The bylines in these have not been made at all distinguished with the bold, italic, centered. They didn't bother to put indents on any of the stories. Because there is no space between paragraphs, which you're not supposed to have, and there is no indent, it's extremely gray in the stories. Down here, this story has no headline at all. In fact, I'm not sure what this is. There's a big space here as if this is a new story. There's no headline. It starts in the middle of a sentence. Let me see if I can figure out which story it goes with. Okay, well, first off, this demonstrates the problem of not linking your text boxes, is that you will be embarrassed once in a while by suddenly not realizing you have a little extra space. So you see here the jump line up here in the up here you have the jump line. It's not bold, so that's not good. There's not a single quote mark around the slug mariachi festival. So it's wrong in several ways. And then here suddenly the first sentence of the jump right under it. So this person obviously didn't want that to be on page 1. They wanted that to be in the jump, but they didn't link it properly. Either that or they didn't, I'm not sure. Maybe they did link it and they then screwed it up after that. But you have to be very careful with that sort of thing. Anyway, what is the problem, this story here, and some of you have jumped a little bit backwards. You can't jump, or you can't take a story from the 4th column in a tabloid and have it continue on the 3rd column or the 2nd column or the 1st column, which is actually exactly what this one did. So this line, it didn't actually go to page 2, as far as no, this is still page 1, and she's jumped this story to lower in page 1. So that's bizarre. She did use a box, but no headline. There's kind of a, I guess the lead uses the pull-out quote is above the picture, which has no caption, and the headline is only at the most 12 point. That's not a headline. Anyway, this, like I say, to give this a C is extremely generous. I should have given it a D. This is too bizarre, but I didn't. Okay, going to another one. Where are we here? By the way, while I'm over here, actually, some of you have the task, you volunteered for the task of analyzing the front pages. And at least 2 of you have asked, well, what do I read to prepare? Well, you really don't have to read anything. You just listen to the prior presentations and learn from them, or you can read the textbook. But your job is not to show us anything out of the textbook. It's to analyze the stories based on the textbook and on my rules, whatever. And maybe take 10 of them. Those of you who have this assignment, maybe take 10 of these 30 and rank them. Which you think is the best, which is one you think second or whatever. And show us the front pages. These are broadsheets. And tell us why you think one is good or bad or ugly or whatever. This is another package that I think looks terrible. They put major headlines at the top of 2 related stories, it appears, and treated this, well, maybe not. Maybe this is a totally different story. There's two corrupt officials on the same page. Anyway, this one, they put lines between stories under them, but they don't put any boxes around or any lines between the stories vertically. Like every newspaper has their own style, how to separate stories. Again, our rule is to put a box around one of them. And by far, this one would be much better, I think, if this headline came below the photo. To at least separate the headlines from each other. Or if nothing else, maybe a headline above and the subheadline below. But even then, you can create some separation of these stories by just putting those below the photo. The bad part, the argument against it, is that this is such a vertical photo that the headline would be below the fold, below the halfway point. So with that vertical of a story, I don't know if you want to bury that headline, I guess. But then my rule would be box one at least, box one. You see these broadsheets again. This one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories on the front. Plus they have their flag or whatever you want to call that. And below they have a plugger, so it's not a story by itself, but it plugs a story inside on their L section. They have a L section even. Well, they've got lots of sections. And of course, St. Louis is a big city. And they have some kind of an index at the bottom. They have an ad at the bottom. Actually, a couple of ads at the bottom. So they've taken a lot of their broadsheet page with ads and flag and one promo, and they still fit in 5 stories. So that's what I was expecting in your broadsheet, was to fit in 5 stories in the front. Without that other stuff, you had even more space than they did. But anyway, going back, so you would take a look at some of these, and so you could open up, you could say you don't like this one because, and make this number 10 on your top 10 list. So you just go through and explain what I just explained. That you have 2 headlines competing with each other at the top without one story being boxed. That the photo could go above the headline and at least cause some separation there. Anyway, that they all have a small subheadline, that's okay, better than nothing. Actually, these apparently are 1 sentence. It has a period at the end, so I guess that's supposed to be a summary sentence, a very short summary sentence going across 2 columns is their style on each of these. And some of these they're showing that they have another story, it would seem like, but they don't have a page on which the other story exists. So I don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense to me. So anyway, you would go through and analyze each of about 10 of the 30 front page. You definitely won't have time. In fact, even 10 might be too much. So if you did 7 or 8, that would be okay. Even then, you'd have to go fairly quickly, and because in 15 minutes you have seven front pages, that's 2 minutes apiece. So you have to go fairly quickly if you have 7. So I'm not going to give you a certain number, but I do note, though, while we're here, again, these are, and you look at all the front pages, none of them have spaces between paragraphs that some you were putting. They all have about 2 or 3 character indent, and some of you had more than that. This is all the 30 will be the same on that. So anyway, going back. Okay, so we'll go up to a B paper. I guess I'm showing more A's than B's or C's today. So in our grading, of course, B's are in the 70% already. C's would go into the 60%. Very few of you got into the C range. I'm generally tend to grade pretty softly, and I'm not used to that grading system. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. Anyway, here's a B. We'll find out why. The first top looks fine. Has a verb in the headline. The headline looks fine. Caption under the photo. Photo's nice and big, so you can see the faces of the dancers. The indents look fine. The story is a little bit tight to the caption, but wouldn't have gotten much of a deduction for that. Problem with vertical justification. But now we get into the problem of the bottom half of the story. We've got lines all over the place, and I have no idea what that's all about. Maybe a total misunderstanding of what I wanted, but by the final, they should have understood better than that. I certainly never demonstrated anything like this. So this story here with bizarre lines over the place. There is a little extra space between the paragraphs. That wouldn't have drawn too much notice. The caption is very, it overlaps into the gutter. It touching every place. Just looks terrible. The headline for this, so it has this is a subheadline, language training. That's not much of a subheadline. Don't even bother to have one if that's all you're going to say. Then a one-column headline should have at least 3 lines. This only has 2. It might be 18 point. It's on the smallish side. Anyway, it's not a big enough headline. They need a bigger headline there, at least 3 to 4. You can have 3 to 4 lines on a one-column headline. This only has 2, and the 2 isn't filled out. Very short. Its jump looks pretty good. Didn't have time to justify or vertically justify the jump apparently. Of course, on a final exam, you are limited by your time. So some things I would expect some mistakes because of the time limitation. Not all the paragraphs were indented in the jump, stuff like that. But the thing that knocked her down to a B was primarily this bottom half of the front page, this bizarre handling of a box, particularly. The subheadline makes no sense. In fact, it looks like, I guess, yeah, it looked like I thought for a second that maybe this headline, that this subheadline was a continuation of the headline because they're the same size, which also you don't do with a subheadline. Anyway, that's just all bizarre. So definitely does not deserve an A, doing something like that. So short, again, should have another line or 2, should fill that out. So there's some good things about it. It deserves, it certainly, I'd say, deserves a B, at least by my easy grading. It get you fired as a professional, but you're under a time constraint, so I'm a little bit lax on that. Going to a B plus. Okay, so this one, using serif headline, which we don't want to do. So may have been part of why it was knocked down from an A minus or an A. Nonetheless, the top looks pretty good. It has a 4-column subheadline along with the 4-column headline in a tabloid. Both should be sans serif, should be Arial, something like that. Byline is okay. I typically recommend that would be in serif type. Has a caption. Way too much space here between and technically it has horizontal justification, pretty close anyway. This line here is a little bit lower, but they line up with the jump line, but there's way too much space between the end of the last paragraph and the jump line. Here they use lines instead of a box. The headlines here, again, still in Times New Roman instead of Arial. Way short in the last line. They're using justification. Here you see the extra spaces. They're using justification on that one. This one looks okay. This one is ragged right. This one's not. This one's justified. You don't want to do that. This bottom one has no indents. Has spaces between paragraphs, no indents. This one has only a single, basically 1 letter indent, so not probably not quite enough indent. The no vertical justification at the bottom, lines instead of boxes. So anyway, going to the jump page, jump headline, different headline, that's okay. Now this one is sans serif, so that actually makes things worse if you're not going to be consistent. Jump line is okay, use double quotes instead of single, but that's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but you need to be consistent on that. Everybody in the newspaper has to be consistent. Not quite vertical justification, no caption. So basically it was, you know, the lack of indents, the extra spaces, the lack of filling the headline area, this big gap here unnecessarily. Otherwise, it was very close to being an A, but it just had some major problems that I couldn't give it an A. So this is a B plus instead of an A minus because of that. Let's see what difference the A minus looks like. Oh, by the way, in Kazakhstan they give A pluses, so that also changes it a little bit. Although I don't see an A plus here, so maybe I just took off the name A plus not to confuse you. I don't know. We'll look at the minuses first. Misspelling in the headline. Grammar problem in the headline. Teachers implements. That's bad grammar. Hope you can see that. They didn't put a byline, but these are all my stories. I didn't care too much about the byline, but might have for this assignment taken off a little bit for lack of byline. Caption okay, photos nice. The jump is a little bit high. It should match up with the bottom of the other columns. Headline here, first line way too short, so that's about from the last one is, you know, about 7 or 8 characters off the last line. So that would get some deduction. This one they boxed 2 stories for some reason. This one, the box is way dark to keep the text black. You probably need to lighten that up if you're going to use a box like that. And there's no reason to have 2 boxes next to each other. So I don't know why she did that. So overuse of boxes is also bad. By the way, however, this is an option. You can see an option for boxing a story, and that is don't put a line around it, put a shade over it. That is an option. And so then that does help with if you're having trouble, not that you should not learn how to do an inset, but if you're having trouble remembering how to do an inset and you're in a hurry, a shaded box without a line on the outside, the text isn't going to touch a line because there's no line. It's just shade. But this is too dark a shade. And if you're going to have boxes next to each other, they need to line up with each other. No excuse not to line up. This graphic here is much too small to be of any good. So, you know, when you have whether it's a picture, I mean, whatever it is, you have to look and ask yourself, does this make any sense? Can anybody actually see this and get any good out of this graphic? In this case, no. This has to be at least 2 columns in order for them to see it well enough to make any sense out of a graphic like that. Jump line has an extra space in here, but basically okay. They have one subhead or one subtitle, not done quite right, but anyway, I may or may not have, probably wouldn't have deducted for doing something that most people didn't bother to subtitle. So I maybe wouldn't have been deducted from that. And pretty good vertical justification at the bottom. So again, the main problem on page 2 is this graphic being absurdly small. By now they should have understood you just can't do that. Absurdly small. Short headlines, but it's pretty good actually in lots of ways. Anyway, so we'll go look at another one. Another A minus. This one also has a full headline across the top with a full subheadline across the top. The subheadline is too redundant to the headline. You have the first 3 lines are exactly the same. Dual language immersion. You can't have your subheadline be that redundant to the headline. Indents inconsistent, which makes me think that she put them in by hand. This one is about 3 lines. I'm not going to criticize 3 lines. This one here is, characters, 3 characters. This one's 2 characters. This one's more like 4 characters. So very inconsistent indents. Got to correct that. Down here, you not only don't have vertical justification, you have a headline coming up into the space of the top story. That's not good. Has a 5-line headline. I'm teaching 3 to 4, maximum 4. She went 5. Has a misspelling. Has too much space on this one. Doesn't use headlinees. The doesn't need to be in there. 2 thes in there that can be eliminated. Here is a case where there's no reason not to kick 2 over to the second line. I may not have talked about in every one of the tutorials, but one of the rules that I consider a lower level rule in headlining is that you keep infinitive verbs together, like to tune, or also phrases like of mariachi would be on the same line. So if you can, keep that rule. So it'd be festival, growing, G should not be uppercased. Then in the 3rd line, maybe to tune, and in the last line of mariachi. If you can do that and stay within 3 characters, I'm not sure if that would all fit properly. But anyway, that is a rule in professional headlining, but I don't consider it as important a rule as making things fit and so forth, but it is a rule. I don't even have it on the critique sheet, so I won't grade based on that, but just letting you know that a professional headline writer, if you go to work for somebody, might give you a bad time about breaking the infinitive and breaking this phrase of mariachi into separate lines when it wasn't really necessary. A lot of extra space here. This could be a bigger headline and would be better if it were bigger. And again, this is totally acceptable to bring this headline up into the space of this upper story. Second page, okay. We again start with the very same, well, no, not quite. They did change it a little bit, but it is a different headline, but anyway. Started off the text with a subtitle. You wouldn't do that on a jump page. Typically, you'd bring that down a little bit. The other one is even a little bit high. If you're going to use subtitles, then you should have more than one subtitle, and they should be separated. So this one might have, like the first subtitle might come into this area here, and then maybe one other subtitle over here in the third column. You don't need to overdo it with subtitles. It does have quite a bit of gray that subtitles would help it. Down the bottom, no headlines on these jumps at all. So I'm thinking maybe I was a little bit harsh in the previous one we looked at if I gave this one an A- also. This one's A-. This one had more problems, more serious problems than the last one. Just again comparing it. This one had no subheadlines, I guess. That would be one problem also. But it was, in my way of looking, was quite a bit bigger than the other one. I gave them both an A-. I don't know. This one still has some pretty bad problems, though. Okay, going back, one more A-. So this in our class would be down in the low 80s. And for whatever reason, I didn't have, I didn't bring over any examples of anything less than that, and I did have some less than that. I did have some D's in here as those that, jump backwards and stuff in bizarre ways. So here, a major headline across 4 columns, a subheadline across 4 columns. That looks fine. Indents seem okay. Nice photo. Caption looking good. Rather than putting extra line spacing, they put maybe a little excessive space between paragraphs to get it to line up. Using line spacing would be less obvious. So this isn't my preferred way to do it by any means. Down here we have lines instead of boxes. We have a split or a hyphenation of a word in a headline. You can't let that stay there. Kind of a smallish headline. This one has a headline and a subhead, so that gives. They centered these to try to cover up the fact that they were short. These also centered to hide the shortness of them, but that just breaks another rule. It doesn't make me blind. This picture is a little small for. It's not a great picture anyway, with kids showing the top of their heads, basically. They had a lot of other better options than this, and it's rather small for 2 pictures. And they were trying to get the triangle effect. Anyway, not real good use of that. Page 2, a big headline again with the jump, and a good picture. Not vertically justified, but so again, this one has a lot of good stuff that got it close to being an A, but breaking my rules of boxing had some effect. Letting a headline hyphenate and centering them had some effect. Smallish picture, probably not much effect. So more the headline is unacceptable. Let your headline split with hyphenation like that. No, can't do that. So I'd say it, again, was very, very close to an A, but didn't make it. Okay, let's look at an A then. Well, I'm right off the bat not sure I should have given an A. We have an all caps headline across the top, kind of smallish, but probably it may be 36 point. The dancers are looking off the page, so I prefer that be flipped. Too much space between lines, or between paragraphs rather. Almost vertically justified, not quite. Again, some lines between paragraphs in this right story. Kind of a smallish headline. That does not look like 18 point to me, but I can't judge it in a PDF, so I'm not sure. The other headline could be stronger, both of them, but box is handled well, enough space around the outside, inset well. This story here should have lined up at the bottom of the box, and didn't. Pretty good justification here. Again, space between lines, or between paragraphs. So this is marginal. It's a marginal A, but I did give it an A. There's nothing that totally comes out other than headlines being serifed instead of sans serif. And maybe a little bit of smallish headline at the top of the first page. And these extra spaces. They skipped the caption in there too. This could have been dropped to an A minus, but it wasn't. It was close. It's a marginal A for sure. No captions here either. Notice if I noticed the captions, maybe I forgot to even look. I don't know, but that might have dropped it to an A minus. No captions at all on page 1 or page 2, so no captions. Maybe it should have been an A minus. When you're grading a whole bunch of papers quickly after finals, it's hard to be exact. So we'll look at, yeah, there's just one other A. Oh, there's one down here too. Okay, we'll look at this one, see if it's better. It is possible that I didn't emphasize sans serif that year. I don't know. But should have been sans serif. Good size major headline, good size subheadline, but it is centered. So I would have thought something about that. The photo does have a caption. I'm not real excited about having this this fourth column come up next to the caption. I'd rather fill the whole space. And it does not have a period at the end of the caption. It should have a period. Little kid. Not much you can say in a sub or in a caption on that little kid if you don't have their names, which he probably would not have had. I think this person made the jump line way too big. Especially, you can see it right here next to a headline. The subheadline for the first story is almost as big as the headline for this second story. This one's also centered, unnecessarily centered. A little tight to the story, but not touching. The headline over here is all caps. Again, one in a page. I can overlook that, even though I don't like it. I'd rather have sentence capitalization. But if you're going to have one, this is a pretty good place to have one. The story's not inset enough. If it's not touching, it's almost touching the box. So that could have merited a deduction there. Misspelled word here, success. And not quite vertical justification on page 2, but under headline or under deadline of a timed final exam, I'm going to kind of overlook some mistakes on page 2. A subtitle, but just one. Again, if you're going to, I think all these ones that on this story just left my subtitle in, so it's not really a subtitle that they put in. And that was an actual change. There were more than one school using this approach to education. So a subtitle keeping in the same story could have been a sidebar instead. Made a good play. It is a good place to have a subtitle if you're going to almost change. You have a second story. If you're not going to make it a sidebar. Anyway, a lot of good things about this, but definitely marginal again. I could have very easily knocked this down to an A- with text touching the box, with the ridiculously big jump lines. You know, with the centering of the headlines without using sans serif headlines. Could have been knocked down. Misspelling is a major one in a headline. Misspelling is bad. And also in the jump line also. So I could have justified knocking it down to an A- if I'd wanted to, but especially in something like a final, perhaps in any project, to some degree I'm going to look at everything and compare them to each other. And I'm going to want to give some A's. So if under the pressure of a final exam, there are some mistakes made. I see program is misspelled on the top of the page too. I still want to give some A's. So I would have given some, and I don't see any perfect papers here. You know, in the circumstances, like I say, I would give some A's even if they're not perfect. I think we had one more A paper. All capped headline, again, not my preference, but one on a page I'll accept. Good subheadline under it, but it's in serif type instead of sans serif. Kind of smallish indents. It should probably be a little bit more than that, at least one more character over. No caption. Way too much space on this headline to the right here. Too many, that's way, way, way bad. Not filling in the space here. No verb in this and no subheadline. Could have been deducted on that. Vertical justification here, lacking. There is a caption under that one. No caption under the head of the state head of schools. I might not have noticed it, but this says a jump that doesn't give a page number, and misspelling in the continues. Migrant education continuous on where? No idea. Also misspelling and continues here in this jump line. Page 2, no verb in the headline. Again, a misspelling in the jump line. Seems like a little bit more indent here, but still not much more than one character. Didn't quite get vertical justification here either. So again, none of the A's are perfect A's by any means. Could easily, if it's a regular assignment, gotten an A- under a tight deadline in a final, if they're the best ones I have, I'd get some A's. But they made some mistakes. So don't make mistakes. Don't count on me being too generous. Again, I'm more likely, because of the deadline pressure of a final exam, to be a little bit more lenient and with no perfect papers. But with your next paper will be a tabloid like these. You have more time. You don't, so you can't blame lack of time on making mistakes like these. So I would say for your next assignment, these would be generously graded. If I gave you this at least the A's are, A minuses maybe. But I might, again, if these were the best that were handed in, I might, but I would hope they would not be the best, leaving these sorts of mistakes with the time that you have. I have not gotten verification, but I have requested some extra hours next Monday. Next Monday is your deadline for this assignment, for your tabloid assignment. So on Monday, I've asked for, again, from 4 to 8 for both 105, and I'd also open 104 at that time. So if you need some extra time on Monday to finish your assignment, you should have quite a bit of time on Monday to do that. Of course, I wouldn't be starting on Monday. I mean, that wouldn't be a good time to start. Wait till Monday to start. But you should have time to finish your tabloid. Again, for you, this was not a luxury these guys had. With your tabloid, you've already had a chance to think about headlines. You've already received lots of critique, if not individually, at least in general. I've looked at a lot of the broadsheets and now quite a few tabloids where you see what mistakes people are making. And so stop making them. Stop making mistakes. So hopefully you can avoid those mistakes. I will, I both in your, I put all of the, well, one of the tutorials, the video didn't come out, so it's not on Moodle, but 3 of the tutorials I spent time, and I separated them, I believe in every case I separated them from the student presentation, so you wouldn't have to look at the student presentations if you didn't want to, and wanted to go straight to my analysis of your work. So you have, a week ago I spent time analyzing your work during the 3 of the tutorial, or in all the tutorials I spent time analyzing your work. In that case, on the tutorials I did it within Quark so I could show you how to correct your mistakes. And so you have 3 tutorials there that you can check if you don't understand. I know you have all the time in the world, saying that sarcastically. I know that's a problem, but at the same time, if anybody got a bad grade, everybody gets a bad grade, then maybe it's because you haven't spent enough time listening. And so maybe you should be looking at some of the tutorials and some of maybe the original demonstration might be good, but also the critiques. So as I said at the start, before some of you arrived, I'm not going to be able to with 96 students, be able to give you as much input as I wanted to. Some of you have already gotten your input, and so you were basically the people who handed their stuff in first have gotten some input. Later on now, those that were later in the process, you're going to get a grade by section. So you'll get a grade on your headlining out of 25, and you'll get a grade on your graphics out of 20, and you'll get a grade on your design out of 25. You'll get a grade on your text, that's what's called, whatever that's called, that section's called, out of 20, and you'll get a grade on your editing out of 10. But probably in order to get you a grade in the next 2 days, so you have some idea of how hard I'm grading before you finish your next assignment. I'm not going to be able to write a lot of sentences and stuff explaining specifically what you did wrong and finish all 96. Just don't have time to do it. So I will get a lot, some of those done today. I'll get the rest done tomorrow. But again, I've given you a lot of general critique, showing a lot of these, whether it's in this case from my Kazakhstan students, but the same principles, or my tutorials or my lecture last week. You've gotten a lot of input kind of generically, but most of the mistakes, especially if you don't get as high a grade as you'd like, I probably covered why you didn't in one of these tutorials. Because most of you are making the same mistakes. When I'm seeing mistakes, they're pretty, things like these, frankly. Bad indents, spacing between paragraphs, no captions, bad headlines, using the wrong style, letting words break on a headline. Can't do that. Bad spacing as far as some things being too tight, touching boxes and stuff, headlines touching the photos, or too loose, way too much space. You have to develop a better eye than that, especially touching. That's not even an eye. That's just laziness to let your headline touch a photo or something. And not too many of you guys did that. So anyway, go over your stuff. Once you're done, have, hey, some of you, not all of you have taken advantage of when I am available to let me take a look at your page. And I feel bad about that because there's not enough time to look at everybody's. And it undoubtedly helps those who get a little bit of review from me. But you can also, one reason why I put you on teams is so your teammates can help in some things. It is not cheating to let somebody else give you input on your work. It would be cheating to let them do your work. But to let them look at your page before you submit it and give you some feedback and say, you're breaking this rule, this rule, this rule, that's not a bad thing to do. Because that's what I would do if you showed it to me. I would give you feedback that you could listen or ignore it, whatever you wanted to do. But again, on the tutorials, that's when I usually have time to look at your stuff. If you want to come ask me to review it real quick, I can't review everything, but I can review some things quickly. But I will, in the tutorials, stay as long as I have to anybody who wants to wait and have me review their page. I will stay long enough. I will stay until everybody's gone. So I don't have anything scheduled right after my tutorial, so if in the tutorial this week, I will probably again give you time to work, so go ahead and bring your laptops and I'll give you time and take the time to review your pages. So if you've already done your, at least a first draft of your page or something and want to show me what you have in the tutorial, again, I will see as many as I can during the tutorial, and I will stay until everybody's gone. So I'll stay there 2 hours if people want to stay, whatever. So sometimes it gets a little bit harder when I get to my office. I will try to do a quick review if somebody comes to the office, but sometimes I have other conflicts, so I don't always control my time. But this week, I think during the days of the tutorials, I have nothing scheduled after any of the tutorials. And so I would be staying as long as you wanted me to stay to help you. So, okay. I'm going to go back and see if by chance we have a, okay, we finally did get Moodle up and running. Again, I sent you a notice of this, but I'm going to go ahead and open up the revised syllabus again, just to, now that people are here, to make sure that you understand. Again, sometimes people don't show up to this tutorial. Obviously, we don't have the room filled. So at the very end, the last 3 weeks have been screwed up because I have to go to a conference, or get to go to a conference, however you want to say that. So during the last 3 weeks, there are some changes. So we see on week 13, there's we're going to have 4 tutorials, so, or 4 student presentations. So some of you were scheduled for week 14. Those that were scheduled for week 14, you're now week 13. And that's necessitated again by the fact that I'll be missing 1 tutorial for each of the tutorials. And that's going to be a different week for depending which day you have your tutorial. So you need to notice in week 14, we do have Tuesday tutorials, but not Wednesday. And then on week 15, we have Wednesday tutorials, but not Tuesday. I actually could do the tutorials, but since I'm trying to keep things even with all 4 tutorials, I'm just going to, basically your tutorial is to go sign in to one of the open labs that's already scheduled. So go to the lab and do some work and sign in. That's your tutorial. You could be working on your magazine. I might even negotiate to be in the evening tutorial of that Wednesday. Excuse me, Wednesday we do have tutorial on the 2nd and the 15th. Tuesday I will be here, should be here in the morning actually. I'll be late for tutorial. But I might announce an evening tutorial. It'd basically be an open lab is what I would announce for Tuesday night, so that anybody could come to it. So you don't have to be in tutorial B or 2, whatever you want to call it, to come to the open lab on that Tuesday night of week 15. So I might go ahead and schedule an open lab, but not a tutorial on that night, just because of the way this falls. Each of you get 1 break and 1 tutorial in those 2 weeks. So to keep it even, I probably will have an open lab on that Tuesday, but not a tutorial per se. On that Tuesday, I'm back in week 15. So it's because of this conference. I'll be gone from the 1st of August to the 7th of August, the morning of the 7th, is why all this has to change. So again, take note of when your tutorial is. So for those that were scheduled for week 14, you're now in week 13. Please be prepared. And in week 14, again, we will have Tuesday tutorials, but not Wednesday. And in week 15, we'll have Wednesday tutorials, but not Tuesday. I will have probably an open lab. I will announce that later. There were probably some other minor changes I put in here, but that was the essence of the changes. The main problem was with your effect was on your presentations, and with each person having at least 1 tutorial that basically is going to be an open lab tutorial. So FISA, of course, she should be able to help you with some things. I don't know exactly. By then, you're going to be working on your magazine project. And the magazine project, again, I'm not going to use as tight of standards with that. Magazines are very different than newspapers. We will have One of our student presentations in week 13 will be editing magazines. And I will definitely be talking about magazines that in the lecture that week. So that's about as much input as you're going to have, other than just go look at magazines. Just look at some magazines. Magazines that have so many different styles that it's impossible to teach a norm with them. But you know the main differences is that they use lots of art. They're obviously a smaller format. We're going to go with just a A4 format and just call that magazine. There are some that size, some a little smaller, some bigger, but we would just use A4 as our size for the magazine. You try to do things a little bit more artistic, so that's where you might very likely put a headline on top of a photo. You're going to be doing, I think the assignment is 4 pages. I think I said you can go 5 if you want to, but I think 4 is the minimum. So you're really probably going to be talking about no more than 3 stories for your magazine. So you kick out, so now you have a better choice of magazines and photos. One thing I pointed out in the tutorials, but maybe I didn't all the tutorials, some of your photos you used were very bad photos, and they were very easy to go get new photos on. Cafeteria story. Yeah, how hard is it to go over to the cafeteria and get a new photo? Again, we had one from way back showing everybody a photo. If you're going to take one in the cafeteria, it should be maybe a close-up of one table and then see in the background other tables of students. So you have some close-up and some in the background. Not stand in the back of the room and try to take everybody at once. There's not enough detail there to make that a good photo. But the same thing would be true from other sort of photos that would be easy to get. For example, there was a photo from the student, I think is in the student affairs or whatever you call that, where it was only backs of heads. You couldn't see anybody, basically. So, but somebody else did go take a picture, another picture of somebody talking to one of the advisors there from the side. So you got both faces into the photo. Very easy to do, very easy to stage if you have to. Just go grab one of your classmates. Let's go take a picture in the student affairs office. I mean, those sorts of pictures are easy to set up. So there's, I told you in the when we set up the teams that you could go take more pictures if you saw you had bad pictures. But some of those bad pictures showed up in the front pages, very big size in some cases, that were not worth big size, were not worth really using. They were such bad pictures. Certainly for your tabloid, you've had plenty of time to go replace some of those pictures. So you use a bad picture, I'm considering you're just a bad editor. I mean, you're just not doing your job as an editor if you're going to use a bad picture. That's not true of every story, but it is true of an easy story where it's a story from campus, where you can go get that, replace that picture in, 5 minutes. Then that's just being lazy. Don't give me a whole bunch of bad pictures. Now, that was actually one of the main things I told you when I split up the teams was go replace some of these pictures. So if you had organized as teams, you could have done this real easily. Everybody have one assignment to go do something to improve what you had to work with. But apparently the teams didn't help each other out very much. So again, I'm expecting something better. I want you to use 4 stories in the front. Okay, I've said that a couple of times. It is now, if you look at your, going up again, let me close this. I revised because I because I just don't want you having excuses not, to do this stuff. I went ahead and revised the critique sheet in order to give more specifics. So under tabloid now it says, I'll read it into the record. So you're supposed to be listening to the lecture. You're supposed to, if you're not here, watch the video. But it says, I guess I can read it here. Using QuarkXpress and abiding by the criteria described in this editing and design and publishing critique sheet, students will produce 2 complete full tabloids. Your size should be 11 by 17 inches or the equivalent thereof. News pages with provided content that you already have. 4 stories should start on page 1 with at least 1 jumping to page 2. Now you probably will jump more than 2 because and this time you have to fill up page 2. So you probably want some jump in order to fill page 2. So I wouldn't be cutting stories. On page 2, let me finish reading it and make sure I say what I'm saying here. So 4 stories start on page 1, at least 1 will jump. You will probably have to jump multiple stories, however, in order to fill page 2, which you are required to do. This project is worth 9%. Okay, so most of you have 5 stories, and I sent out for those who only had 4. By the time they edited down their other stories or whatever, I sent a story that I wrote that anybody who needed a 5th story could use. So you should have received that already. If not, go back and look at your messages. It is, well, anyway, I sent it out with a notice. If you need it again, just ask me, I'll send it again. But, so you all should have access to 5 stories. Now, don't use mine unless you need it. I don't want to use mine unless you need it because I don't want mine showing up in the tabloid I am going to put together as one complete. This is the one that's going on to Facebook. And so I want to have as many distinct stories. I want all the stories someplace, basically. If you have 5 stories, it would seem to make sense to put the 5th story on page 2, at the top of page 2. And that's one of the things I also mentioned, I think, in most of the tutorials, maybe not all of them, but I'm mentioning now, is that if you're going to have on page 2 mostly jumps, push them to the bottom and put your real story at the top, because you're going to get more likely to draw stories onto that page with a complete story than a jump story. Why would somebody just start on page 2 and start reading jumps? I have sometimes, but most people won't, probably. So you want your real story at the top of the page, your real complete story, and then put your jumps under that. Now you might want to put your jumps in first so you know how much room you have at the top. You don't really have to do that. If you, one of your challenges will be completing that page exactly 2 pages. So some of you aren't used to doing that, and you haven't done that before. I didn't insist on completing page 2 last time. Some of you did do that, but most of you did not and weren't required to. But this one you do have to complete page 2 because you have less space, because they're tabloid instead of broadsheet. You should have enough stories to fill 2 pages. So again, let me, I do have just a few minutes here. Let me open up Anyway, I'm going to show again. I have shown you before, but I can show you again how to select more than one story and move them all at once. So you can select all of the elements of a story, and you can select multiple stories and move them. So if you start your jumps at the top, just to have a kind of a starting point and make them even out, you can bring them all to the bottom when you're done putting in your jumps. It seems like our IT people are doing something with all our servers, but okay, so here we're up and running again. I'll just show it on one of yours. Doesn't matter what I'm showing it on. Okay, so just choosing one of your stories. Let me go to Control 0. Well, here's page 1, but let's go to page 2. Okay, so let's say you have, this is what your jump is. Well, there's two. So you have your jumps. You went ahead and put in your jumps on page 2. This obviously isn't enough jump, but with your tabloid you have less space, so you should have more jump than this. But let's say you get to this point. Let me go over to the authoring view. So I have to go to View and go down and go to the author's view. Okay, so well, let's say you're all done. If you really only had these two, this one would also have to go in this case, 6 columns in order to even out the bottom, because you are going to have to even out the bottom of your page. So you are stuck with that part. But let's forget about that for now. You can just come out here into the pasteboard, as at least PageMaker used to call it, and just using your item tool, again, using your item tool, just go out here and draw a box that encompasses everything you have done so far. They will all be selected. And so now you can take all of them and bring them all down. So now you just bring it down and just, so let's say you bring it down now, and you have a complete story to fill. So you bring your jumps all down, and now I may have to go in a little closer to make them line up just right to make sure they've done it right. But anyway, you get the idea. So then you can put your complete story at the top. So you might put in your jumps first, make sure they're all evened out, then just drag them down to the bottom, and now you have room at the top to put your one complete story in. So that may be the easiest way to do it, and that's fine. But so just understand, you can select all this stuff just with the item tool, just draw a box around it. It selects everything, and now you can do anything with it you want to. And again, I would probably want to go down to Control 1 to make sure that everything's lining up right. And this appears not to be, so just go over a little bit maybe. And I'm going to have to drag over here and see if they've lined up. So apparently this box was a little bit more than one column to start with. So actually, it does need to come over to the outside guide. Anyway, so that's how you do it. Again, maybe we have 1 minute, but again, if you're trying to fill the space in a headline, that's the other thing that is really important for you to get used to. You are looking at going to thesaurus or whatever, looking at new ways to word it, look at new words to use to replace other words. So 0% GST creates a tax holiday in Malaysia. I mean, it sounds nice, but we now have to figure out, we have to reword it or figure out some bigger words to put in. And you know, sometimes you have a really nice headline, like this one's a nice headline. It just doesn't fit. And so you may not be able to stay with your nice headline. You may just simply have to start from scratch. This one's hard to, except maybe up here you have potential with the GST to do something with that. Again, we've got the box trying to, there we go. Yep. Okay, well, the graphic box is trying to rule, so I'm going to have to maybe send that back. So I'll right-click it and tell it to send the graphic box to the back. Oops, where are we? And then I should be able to get into my text box. That's the other thing some of you might be having some trouble with. And even then now, maybe it's this other box that is trying to take preference. It shouldn't. Okay, okay, so I'm in. So your best place here, it would be with the GST. Those are just initials. And so now you can go ahead and replace that. What is that, general sales tax? What's the G stand for, general? Whatever. So spell it out. Voila, it fits. You just have to try some different stuff. In some cases, if you have a short form of something, like initials here, this just happens to fit perfectly once I spelled out, well, if that's the correct, if that's what it stands for, GST, general sales tax, whatever it is. Anyway, if that's the right one, I solved that one by just spelling it out rather than using the initials. So look at that. What can you change? You can go to thesaurus, look for different words, smaller or bigger. Think of extra words you can put in. And you may have to start from scratch. Like I said, if it hadn't had GST in there, I would have probably had to start from scratch and ruin a very nice sounding headline because it just wasn't fitting the space. But there's lots of options. With 2 columns, you're allowed to go to 2 lines. So one option is to cut it down rather than going bigger, cut it down, and go to 2 lines instead of 3. Again, I just spelled out the initials to fill it out. Anyway, just lots of things to look at, what to spell out, what to not spell out. Thesaurus, bigger words, smaller words, 2 lines, 3 lines, depending on how many lines you have and whether it's 2 columns or 3 columns or 4 columns or whatever, 1 column. Just look at all the options, but leaving, 10 characters shy is going to get you a deduction. So you don't want to do that. Again, your headlines are worth 25% of your grade, and so those that were leaving 10 characters short or whatever got a pretty big deduction on their headline section of the grade. So you don't want to do that. Figure out a way to fill it out. Okay, well, we're out of time. Again, on the tutorial, we'll have our student presentations, and I will be glad to answer general questions. If I feel like there's something I need to demonstrate, I will. But most of the time, I'll give to you, let you bring up your individual papers to review with me if you have them in a position where they're ready for review. Again, I can just take a short time to review each paper, but I will stay in the tutorial till everybody leaves. So if you feel like, gee, I'll never get to the front of the line, well, bring some homework, do some homework until you get to the front of the line. I'll stay there until I get to you. So that I can promise. Okay, thank you.